She stood up in the middle of the meeting, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You'll pay for the roof or you can pack your things." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because 5 months ago they were the ones who broke it, and now they wanted me to fix it. Think you can guess how this all turned out? I seriously doubt it. Go ahead, drop your theory in the comments, but I'm telling you now, you're not even close. Alright, buckle up. So before all the HOA nonsense started, before lawyers, secret meetings, and the roof that nearly broke me, I was just a guy trying to hold it together. I'd gone through a divorce that didn't end in flames, but it left me standing in the ashes anyway. My ex-wife Julie and I split custody of our daughter Ellie, week on, week off. She was 12 when we moved in, quiet, sharp, always sketching in her little notebook. I bought the condo for her more than for me. I wanted her to have something that felt solid. Predictable. Home. We weren't rolling in cash, but I wasn't hurting either. I'm a structural engineer, mostly freelance now, doing design reviews for infrastructure projects. Bridges, dams, sometimes municipal stuff. It sounds cooler than it is. Mostly I sit in front of a laptop tearing apart someone else's math, drinking too much coffee and wondering why everyone always forgets about lateral loads. The upside is I can work from anywhere. The downside is you end up doing that thing where your home slowly becomes your office, and then your office becomes your entire life. That's why I picked this condo. It had these big windows in the living room that overlooked the woods. There's a walking path out back that Ellie and I used to call the escape route whenever either of us needed a breather. The place needed work, sure. Floors were dated. Kitchen had those fake brass handles from the 90s, but it felt right. I could finally do things my way. I didn't have to compromise with anyone about the color of the walls or whether or not we needed another decorative pillow. I put in the effort. New floors, painted the whole unit myself, built a proper desk in the second bedroom with actual outlets where I wanted them. I installed dimmable lighting in Ellie's room that she could control with her voice. She thought that was magic. I thought, finally, maybe I'm not failing at this dad thing. The HOA wasn't even a blip on my radar at first. They had a little welcome packet and a laminated sheet with rules like no trash bins on the porch and quiet hours after 10. Fine, whatever. I paid the dues every month, automatic withdrawal, done and forgotten. The management company sent newsletters with stuff like pet reminders and bake sales. I didn't read them. I figured, like most things in suburbia, it was all just background noise. It wasn't until I tried to fix a leaking outdoor light that I realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. This was months back, before the real nightmare started. I noticed the fixture by my front door was shorting out. Light kept flickering every time it rained. I'm no electrician, but I'm not helpless either. Took it down, checked the wiring, replaced a connector, screwed it back up. 2 days later, I get a notice taped to my door. Unauthorized exterior modification, HOA violation. Immediate corrective action required. I stood there, holding that notice like it was in a foreign language. I didn't paint the Mona Lisa on my siding. I just fixed a damn light so my kid wouldn't come home in the dark. I called the number listed. Some lady with a fake friendly voice told me I was supposed to get written pre-approval for any alteration to common area components. That was the first time I heard the phrase common area component, and that was the first little warning bell. Not loud, not threatening, just annoying. I figured that was the end of it, filed it away as classic HOA pettiness. Lesson learned. Don't touch anything outside the front door without filling out a form in triplicate. But then one evening, Ellie asked me something that landed a little deeper. She was sitting on the couch in her fuzzy blue socks, watching me cook spaghetti. She said, "Do you like it here, Dad?" It caught me off guard. I remember turning down the burner and wiping my hands on a towel. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" She shrugged and looked out the window toward the woods. "I don't know, just feels like people are always watching. Like when I skate in the driveway, there's this lady with the poodle who keeps writing stuff in a notebook." I laughed at first. Maybe she's just keeping track of her dog's poop schedule. Ellie didn't laugh. She said, "She stared at me like I was doing something wrong." That stuck with me, not because it was some big revelation, but because it came from her, and she doesn't exaggerate, so I started paying more attention. Neighbors were friendly enough in passing, waves, nods, the usual suburban dance. But something about the place felt curated, like everyone was putting on a polite face for some invisible camera. A few units had little security stickers in the windows, even though there were no actual cameras. One guy across the way, Greg, I think, power washed his driveway twice a week. Another neighbor, Dana, once told me I should reconsider my welcome mat because the message, "Come back with tacos," was not in keeping with the community aesthetic. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Still, all of that just felt like white noise, quirks, nothing worth fighting over, and it's not like I had the bandwidth for drama anyway. I had work deadlines, I was helping Ellie with algebra, I was figuring out how to cook meals she'd actually eat that didn't come out of a freezer. Life was full enough. Looking back, I think that's exactly what they count on. That you'll be too busy, too tired, too normal to notice when something's off. I didn't realize then that everything was already starting to shift beneath my feet. That under all the suburban smiles and perfectly edged lawns, there were cracks in the foundation. Not metaphorical ones, real cracks, in the damn roof. I got home from dropping Ellie off at her mom's place, groceries in one arm, half a coffee in the other, and there it was, taped to my door, fluttering just enough to catch my eye like it was proud of itself. A letter from the HOA. At first, I didn't even think to be nervous. I figured it was another one of those community updates about mulch standards or garage sale etiquette. But when I peeled it off the door, I felt that weird tightness in my chest, like my body knew something before my brain did. Inside the envelope was a single page, printed in that passive-aggressive font HOAs seem to love. Big, bold heading, notice of emergency special meeting. Attendance required. No details, no reason, no explanation of what the meeting was about, just that it was mandatory for all owners of Building C and would be held in the community clubhouse 2 evenings from now. Now look, I'm not paranoid by nature, but there's something about a note like that, one that's vague enough to feel ominous and official enough to feel serious, that gets under your skin. Why just our building? What emergency? And why the hell weren't they saying what this was actually about? I texted my neighbor, Carlos. He's lived in the unit below me since the early 2000s, retired Navy, always tinkering with something in his garage. He just replied, "Yeah, got one too. No clue, HOAs being HOA. Great. So I went. Obviously, I mean, what choice do you have? When someone from your HOA uses the word emergency, you don't skip it. You don't want to be the guy who misses a meeting and wakes up to find they've declared your mailbox a safety hazard and fined you for non-compliance. The clubhouse was already half full when I walked in. Plastic chairs, stale coffee, and that giant silver dispenser. The whole thing had the vibe of a church basement trying to feel important. A whiteboard at the front said, "Building, see structural update." That was the first time I had a real guess about what this might be. I figured maybe they were finally going to address the leaking roof I'd reported, months ago, by the way. I'd sent in 2 emails with photos, including one where water had clearly pooled under the attic insulation above my bedroom. Got no real response, just a generic, "Thank you, your concern has been noted." I saw Sharon Keller standing by the folding table at the front in her signature beige pantsuit and pearls, holding a stack of manila folders like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Next to her was a younger guy in a tight-fitting blazer and a Bluetooth headset still in his ear. Didn't look like he lived here, probably some contractor or legal rep. Sharon had a way of surrounding herself with people like that. Confident, polished, vaguely intimidating. She didn't smile when she started talking. She didn't even say hi, just launched into it like we'd interrupted her evening. "We've identified significant degradation in the structural integrity of the roof above Building C," she said. "It's not safe, it needs to be replaced, and it's not optional." You could feel the oxygen leave the room. She talked for maybe 5 minutes, throwing around terms like accelerated water intrusion and core sheathing compromise, but never once did she mention how they came to that conclusion or who inspected it. No photos, no quotes, no formal report, just her saying it was bad and that we were all going to have to pony up to fix it. Then came the real kicker. She opened one of those folders, pulled out a paper, and said, "The estimated cost per unit owner is $11,870. Payment plans will be made available, but the obligation is non-negotiable." I remember blinking a few times, thinking surely I'd misheard. 11,000 for a roof that they manage, that we've been paying dues on for years so they'd take care of this kind of crap. I raised my hand. Sharon sighed audibly. "Yes, Mr. Brody? Was there a vote on this? Any competitive bids? Has an inspection report been made available to the owners?" She gave me this tight-lipped smile, the kind that says she's already dismissed everything you're about to say. There are provisions in the bylaws allowing the board to act in emergencies without a community vote. This qualifies. And no, the reports are not being distributed at this time. They are internal documents. internal documents. I looked around, expecting others to be just as rattled, but the room was weirdly silent. A few people looked uneasy, sure, but no one else spoke up. It was like she'd thrown out this bombshell and everyone was too stunned, or too used to this kind of thing, to react. Sharon kept going, detailing payment deadlines and consequences for non-compliance, then ended the meeting like she'd just finished reading weather updates. No Q&A, no open discussion, just, "Thank you for your cooperation," and a forced smile. I stood there for a moment while people gathered their coats, avoiding eye contact. Some whispered to each other in hushed tones, but no one looked interested in confrontation. It was like they all assumed the decision had already been made, and there was no point fighting it. Carlos walked up beside me. He didn't say anything at first, just folded his arms and stared toward the front of the room where Sharon had just packed up her folders and left. Then he muttered, "That's not how things used to be around here." I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head and walked off. I drove home that night with this tight, cold feeling in my gut. It wasn't about the money, though 11 grand is no joke. It was the way it was delivered. No discussion, no evidence, no accountability. Just, "You owe this now." And somehow, everyone just accepted it. Everyone but me. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't just the money, it was the way Sharon delivered that decision, like it was carved into stone, like we didn't have a choice, like this place wasn't full of people who bought in thinking they were owners, not tenants under some weird suburban dictatorship. I spent the next morning digging through the HOA's governing documents. I still had the big welcome packet stashed in the file cabinet under my tax folders. Most people never read that stuff, but I wanted to be sure, and what I found, well, it didn't surprise me exactly, but it sure as hell pissed me off. There was language about emergencies. Sharon wasn't lying about that, but it was vague. Really vague. The kind of thing that could mean actual structural collapse or, I don't know, a suspicious-looking puddle in the attic. But nowhere did it say the board could skip competitive bids. Nowhere did it say they could refuse to show us inspection reports. And nowhere did it say the HOA could just hand everyone a bill for nearly 12 grand without a formal vote or even a basic cost breakdown. So I emailed them. I kept it civil. No swearing, no threats. Just a direct, bullet-pointed request for a copy of the inspection report. An explanation of why this qualifies as an emergency. Details on how the contractor was selected. The HOA's projected budget and reserve status. No response. Not a single word. Not even an automatic reply. 4 days later, I got a new notice on my door. Same style, same fake-friendly formatting. This time it was a warning. Failure to submit first installment by the specified due date will result in late penalties and potential lien placement. I read it 3 times, just standing there in my hallway with the light flickering above me. A lien on my home for not paying a charge that was never voted on, never justified, never even properly documented. That's when it stopped being annoying and started being something else, something darker. I tried talking to my neighbors. Tina, the single mom upstairs, seemed sympathetic at first. She said she didn't like how fast everything moved either, but when I asked her if she'd be willing to push back with me, write a letter, maybe speak up, she shook her head and looked genuinely scared. "Sharon's persistent," she said, like she was choosing that word very carefully. "She's not someone you want to get on the bad side of." I said, "You mean the person managing our collective property and handling our money? You're afraid of her?" Tina didn't say anything. She just gave me this look, not annoyed, not dismissive, just tired, like she'd already been through some version of this and learned the hard way. The next blow came when I tried to speak up during the next monthly HOA meeting. It was virtual, over Zoom. I waded through the whole dull agenda, landscaping updates, some nonsense about pool hours, then finally the roof project update. When they opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand, digitally, and unmuted. I calmly, respectfully asked for transparency. Again, I asked why none of the owners had seen the inspection report. I asked why we hadn't seen multiple bids. I asked where our dues had been going all these years if the roof was already falling apart. The response? Sharon smiled like she was on a TV debate and said, "We appreciate your enthusiasm, Tom, but the board has already reviewed the necessary materials and made the decision. Further discussion at this time isn't productive." Then, click, they muted me. Just like that. Next morning, I tried posting on the HOA's internal forum. Not even anything dramatic. Just a copy of my email and a question. "Has anyone else seen the inspection report?" It got deleted within the hour. Carlos stopped me by the mailbox that evening, said he'd seen my post. He didn't say much else, but he gave me this firm nod. That was the first time I realized I wasn't completely alone, but I was still far from having backup. Then things started getting personal. A week or so later, I got another notice, this one about my balcony. Apparently my potted herbs were a violation of uniform appearance guidelines. That same basil and rosemary I'd had out there for 2 years with 0 complaints? Suddenly they were a problem, and it wasn't just me. My guest parking code randomly stopped working. A landscaper showed up unannounced and trimmed the shrubs outside my unit so aggressively that one of them literally died within a week. Then came the emails from a compliance consultant the HOA had hired, asking me to confirm whether I'd made any unauthorized modifications to the window treatments or external lighting since moving in. What the hell even is a compliance consultant? Ellie noticed it too. She asked why the neighbors' kids didn't say hi anymore when she walked past. She said one of the moms told her she couldn't hang out until everything settled down. I didn't even know what that meant. Settled down? I hadn't even started anything. I just asked some questions. Then came the lawyer letter. Certified mail. Thick envelope. I opened it and sat on the kitchen floor while I read it. The HOA was formally notifying me of their intent to pursue further collection actions if I failed to begin payments toward the special assessment. It included legal citations, threats of liens, and a gentle little line at the end about how it is our hope to avoid escalation through neighborly cooperation. Neighborly cooperation. I called their bluff and replied with a certified letter of my own. I cited the governing documents. I asked again for a copy of the roof inspection, and for proof of the vote to proceed, I told them I wouldn't be paying until I'd received documentation any reasonable homeowner would expect. That's when I stopped getting notices on my door and started getting visits instead. One afternoon, I came back from a run and saw Sharon herself standing on my front steps, arms crossed, no clipboard, no smile. She said, "Tom, we really don't want this to become unpleasant." That's the word she used. Unpleasant. I just looked at her and said, "It already is." Then I closed the door. That was the moment it really shifted. Before that, I think part of me still believed we could find middle ground, that I could point out the facts, shine some light, and people would come around. But after that visit, it was clear. This wasn't about the roof. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about money anymore. It was about power. And Sharon Keller didn't want her little empire questioned by some guy with a toolbox and a spreadsheet. Fine, she'd made her move. Now it was my turn to figure out mine. Alright, so here's the thing. I'm not the kind of guy who thinks every disagreement needs to turn into some full-on war. I really did want to solve this like an adult. I mean, what's the alternative? Spend months battling with a bunch of bored retirees and part-time power addicts who somehow ended up with more control over my home than I ever signed up for. No thanks. That wasn't the plan. So I started where most people start when they don't know what the hell is going on. Google. I spent 2 full evenings on my laptop just reading HOA laws, state statutes. Cases where HOAs had overreached. There were forums too, some just rants, others packed with actual advice from people who'd been through similar hell. It felt like stepping into a secret underground support group for people trying to survive the HOA industrial complex. What I found didn't make me feel better. Turns out, HOAs are like mini governments with almost zero oversight. In a lot of states, unless they're doing something blatantly illegal or violating their own bylaws in a way you can prove on paper, you're basically out of luck. And proving it? That's the tricky part, especially when they control the paper. Still, I wasn't about to give up just because the system was stacked. I needed something solid, something real. So I called the county records office, asked for any permits or inspections tied to our building in the last 6 months. The guy on the phone was helpful, surprisingly. Looked it up while I waited. Nothing. No permit applications, no filed inspections, no documentation at all regarding roof work. That didn't mean no one looked at it. Private assessments don't always go through the county, but it did mean the HOA hadn't gone the official route. That felt important. Sketchy, at the very least. I wrote another letter, more formal this time, sent it certified. cited the bylaws, quoted the parts about required transparency, and formally requested a copy of the roof inspection and proof of the emergency status. I gave them 2 weeks to respond. Silence. Again, so I started calling attorneys. That was a whole new world. Most of them didn't even bother calling me back. The ones who did gave me basically the same rundown. HOAs suck, yes, but unless there's obvious fraud or you've got a group of owners ready to make noise with you, you're better off paying and moving on. One guy, I remember him clearly, his name was Alex, and he sounded young, maybe still building his own practice. He was the only one who didn't just wave me off. He asked for a quick summary, then paused and said, "You're going to need records, proof they didn't follow their own procedures, otherwise they can steamroll you." I asked if I should sue. He laughed. Not mockingly, just the kind of laugh that tells you you've stepped into deeper waters than you thought. "If you've got 50 grand lying around and a couple years to spare, sure," he said, "but that's not the kind of battle you win quickly or cleanly." He did, however, tell me to document everything. Every letter, every interaction, every missing response. I was already doing that, but after that call, I started scanning everything, saving copies in multiple folders. Even recorded some phone calls, with disclaimers. Of course, Texas is a one-party consent state. I checked. Next, I filed a complaint with the state's HOA ombudsman program. It's kind of like yelling into a locked room, but it was all I had. Filled out the forms, attached copies of everything I'd sent, detailed every attempt I'd made to resolve this without conflict. Weeks passed. No reply. During all of this, I was still getting HOA notices. They'd stopped being about the roof, though. Now it was a revolving door of violations. My porch light was too bright. My front steps had chipping paint. They didn't. My grass was inconsistent in color, even though we all had the same damn lawn service. It was ridiculous, exhausting. And yeah, I started to crack. I remember one night sitting on the back steps after Ellie had gone to bed, just staring out into the trees behind our building. I could hear the sound of sprinklers somewhere in the distance, and for a second, everything felt weirdly calm. Then I saw a light flick on in Sharon's unit. Her window faced mine. She didn't look out, but I suddenly got this feeling, deep, real, that she knew exactly what she was doing, that all of this wasn't just bureaucracy or lazy management. This was personal now. Still, I didn't want to drag Ellie through some drawn-out mess. I didn't want her thinking her dad was the angry guy in the neighborhood who fought with everybody. She was already asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Why don't they like you? Are we going to have to move? Did you do something wrong? That last one broke me a little. I sat her down and explained it the best I could. Told her that sometimes people in charge don't like being challenged. That grown-ups can act unfairly, too. That just because someone has a title doesn't mean they're always right. She nodded like she understood, but I could tell she didn't fully. How could she? I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted things to be fair. I even wrote one final letter to the HOA board, not just Sharon, but the other members. I printed it out, hand-signed it, slid it under doors, emailed copies. I wasn't angry in it. I was tired. Honest. I laid everything out. My concerns, the legal gaps, my attempts to solve this through communication. I even offered to help coordinate a second opinion from another contractor on my own dime, just to have something neutral everyone could look at. Not a single response. Nothing. But I know they got it. Because 2 days later, someone egged my truck. Not smashed, not keyed, just egged. Not ainted. Middle school level petty. And I knew, in that moment, the message was clear. I wasn't just asking questions anymore, I was officially the enemy. The twist, when it came, didn't arrive with a bang. It wasn't dramatic or loud or dressed up in some perfect movie moment. It came in the form of a busted HVAC return vent and a soggy cardboard box. Ellie had gone back to her mom's for the week, and I figured I'd finally crawl into the attic and see if I could trace where exactly the water was getting in. My ceiling had a tiny stain just above the closet, barely visible unless you were looking, but I'd heard the dripping. It wasn't constant. It was like the roof waited for me to get comfortable, then gave a soft tap just to remind me who was in charge. So I dragged out my flashlight, popped the attic hatch open, and climbed up into the stale, insulation-scented dark. I wasn't up there 5 minutes before I saw it. A beat-up Home Depot box shoved back behind the ductwork, half collapsed and clearly soaked through at some point. I probably wouldn't have noticed it if the light from the vent hadn't caught the shiny tape just right. I pulled it closer and almost didn't open it. Honestly, part of me thought it might be some old mouse nest or forgotten junk from the previous owner, but something about the shape of it, the fact that it was taped up and not just tossed, made me curious. Inside, paperwork. A lot of paperwork. Invoices, receipts, folded legal-sized documents, some of them still damp around the edges. All of them looked old. I flipped through the top few pages, expecting to see something boring like appliance manuals or closing documents. But what I found stopped me cold. It was a contractor's invoice for roofing work. Dated 5 years ago. The company listed? Redwater Construction, LLC. The total? Just over $300,000. It covered complete tear-off and replacement of Building C's roofing system. Labor, materials, ventilation, everything. Signed by both the contractor and Sharon Keller, who was apparently board president even back then. I sat there on the wooden beam, the attic barely lit by the thin beam of my flashlight, and just stared at that signature like it was mocking me. Why the hell would they need another roof replacement if we already had one 5 years ago, a full replacement? Not patchwork, not partial. The whole thing. That wasn't even the part that made my stomach drop. Near the bottom of the box was a folder labeled in blue ink, Supplementals, Redwater. Inside were handwritten notes, multiple work orders, and several payment receipts. Most of them were from a name I didn't recognize, Alan Koenig. That name didn't mean anything to me in the moment. Not yet. But I tucked it away, took the whole box down, and spent the next 6 hours on my kitchen table sorting, scanning, trying to make sense of it all. Turns out Alan Koenig was listed as a consultant on the roof project. He billed the HOA almost $20,000 for site reviews and materials verification. But what really jumped out was the company name stamped on one of the payment slips, Koenig Property Services, LLC, so I Googled it. Guess what popped up? Fatsamkatz, one business listing, inactive. Registered under the same address as Sharon Keller's unit. I swear I sat back in my chair and actually said, "You've got to be kidding me." There it was, in black and white. 5 years ago, the HOA had already replaced our roof, paid for, installed, finished, and Sharon had signed off on it. But now, here she was demanding another replacement and sticking us all with the bill. No mention of the past project, no documentation, just this vague emergency and a sky-high cost. I pulled up my phone and looked back at the original special assessment letter. Nowhere did it say anything about a previous repair, and definitely not that they'd hired someone who apparently was operating out of Sharon's own building. I didn't know what this meant legally, not yet, but it felt wrong, dirty. If nothing else, it proved that they were hiding something and possibly trying to double-dip the same repair project. I didn't sleep that night either. Not out of stress, not this time. This time, it was adrenaline. I wasn't crazy, I knew something was off, and now I had proof. Maybe not the smoking gun, but enough smoke to make people ask questions. I kept thinking back to all those meetings, the way she dismissed my questions like I was wasting her time, the way the board shut me down, the fake violations, the lawyer letters, the social freeze-out, all that effort, all that pressure. Now it made sense. They weren't trying to fix a roof. They were trying to cover their own tracks. And the funny part, they left the evidence in my attic. It was like the house itself was done, being quiet, like it had finally gotten tired of the bullshit too. And I'll be honest, at that point, I had no idea how deep this would go, or what kind of fire I'd just stuck my hand into. But I did know one thing for sure, I wasn't backing off. Not now, not with this in my hands. Hell no. Alright, so now I had something real. Not just a hunch, not a weird vibe, not another deleted forum post. Documents. Hard copies with signatures, stamps, line items, names, totals. It was like finding a blueprint to a secret room you didn't even know existed. And now that I had it, I needed to figure out how to use it without blowing it all up too fast. I wasn't looking for revenge. That wasn't what this was about. I just wanted my life back. I wanted to stop feeling like I was being watched in my own home. I wanted Ellie to be able to ride her bike in the parking lot without being judged. I wanted to stop checking my mailbox like it might bite me. And I wanted my roof fixed properly without being forced to bankroll someone else's second yacht or midlife crisis. But I knew if I went in too hot, if I just started waving around receipts and throwing accusations, it'd backfire. Sharon would twist it, frame it like I was making things up, misinterpreting old records, or just stirring up chaos. She'd already turned half the neighbors against me just for asking questions. Imagine what she'd do if I accused her of financial abuse. So I took a breath, I slowed down, and I made a plan. First, I needed to know how bad this thing really was. I mean, maybe I just had a box of old paperwork and circumstantial connections, or maybe I was sitting on something that could rip the lid off the whole damn HOA. I wasn't a lawyer, I couldn't be the one to make that call. I remembered that young attorney I'd talked to weeks earlier, Alex, the one who didn't laugh me off the phone. I still had his email, so I reached out again, told him I'd found some records that seemed off, asked if he'd be willing to take a look. He got back to me within the hour, said I could send digital scans and he'd take a look, no charge, just to get a sense of what I was holding. I spent the next 2 nights scanning everything. I laid it all out. The original contractor invoice, the duplicate consultant payments, the links between Sharon and Koenig Property Services, the missing permits, the new emergency roof project with no vote, no bid, no transparency. I even included the screenshots from the HOA forum before my post got scrubbed. Alex called me the next day, and the first thing he said was, "You've got something here. It's messy, but it's not nothing." That might have been the most validating sentence I'd heard in 6 months. He said the records raised serious red flags, especially the double billing and the lack of competitive bidding. He wasn't sure if it would hold up as fraud without a formal investigation, but he was sure it was enough to warrant attention, and attention was exactly what I needed. We talked about options. Legal action was still a stretch. I didn't have the money to bankroll a full lawsuit, and the HOA could just bury it in procedural garbage. But there were other ways, strategic ways, public ones. I didn't need to beat them in court. I needed to make noise, and not alone. That's when I circled back to Carlos. Now I hadn't leaned on him too hard before. He was the type who kept to himself, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't like drama. But I figured if anyone would be old school enough to appreciate real evidence, it'd be him. So I knocked on his door. He opened it halfway, like always, just enough to see me, but not enough for his dog to bolt. I held up a manila folder and said, "I found something in my attic. You might want to see this." He stared at me for a few seconds, then stepped aside and let me in. I laid it all out for him. Slowly. No dramatics, just the facts. The double billing, the timeline, the company tied to Sharon, the missing inspection reports, the identical roof project that had already been done 5 years earlier, under the table by the looks of it. Carlos didn't say much while I talked, just nodded, grunted once or twice. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, rubbed his jaw, and said, "Damn." That was it, just damn. But the way he said it, that low, slow tone, you could tell it landed. Then he surprised me. "I knew something smelled off," he said. "Didn't have the receipts, but I always figured she had side deals going. That woman doesn't blink unless she's billing someone." I asked if he'd be willing to back me up. He didn't even hesitate. Said if I needed a witness, someone who'd lived here long enough to recognize every crack and patch job on that roof, he was in. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. From there, the plan started to come together. Real steps, not just reacting. Action. Alex helped me draft a formal records request to the HOA board, demanding access to financial disclosures, project contracts, vendor payment history, everything I was entitled to as a dues-paying owner. He worded it perfectly, calm, neutral, but firm. We CC'd the management company and the treasurer. No more backroom whispers. Then we filed a second complaint with the state attorney general's office. Not the HOA ombudsman this time, but the Fraud and Consumer Protection Division. We attached the documents, the signatures, the timeline, no accusations, just a tip for review. And while that was processing, I started having quiet conversations with a few neighbors, the ones I thought might actually listen. I didn't go door to door like some political candidate, I just bumped into them casually. Walks, mailbox chats. You'd be surprised how quickly people open up when you show them facts instead of theories, and when they saw the paperwork, their faces changed, especially Tina. She was the one I didn't think would ever turn. But when I showed her the contractor invoice from 5 years ago and the second emergency bill we'd all just been slapped with, she looked like someone had taken the wind out of her. "I paid the first installment already," she whispered, "over $3,000. I nodded. "You're not the only one." Her voice shook. "Can we get it back?" I didn't know, but I told her what I did know, that this wasn't over, and the more of us stood up, the less power Sharon had to steamroll any one person. The plan was never about torching the place. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about forcing the board to answer the questions they'd spent years dodging, about dragging their shady dealings into the light where they couldn't hide behind bylaws and passive-aggressive notices. I still didn't know exactly where it was going. I didn't have a crystal ball or some airtight masterstroke, but I had evidence. I had support. And now I had momentum. That was enough. It had to be. I kicked things off quiet. Real quiet. No angry letters, no shouting matches, no flyers stapled to trees or dramatic declarations at the mailbox. I'd learned by now that's exactly what Sharon wanted. Give her a loudmouth neighbor with a temper, and she'd frame it as a disruption to community harmony before I could say the word lawsuit. So I smiled at everyone. I waved to the guy with the hedge clippers. I even held the door open for Dana from Unit 3B, who once passive-aggressively left me a note about how my recycling bins were audibly disorganized. I played the part. Meanwhile, I was moving pieces behind the curtain. The records request went out. Formally, legally, and with all the right language Alex helped me draft. They had 10 business days to respond under state HOA transparency rules. We sent it via certified mail, email, and dropped off a hard copy in the management office so they couldn't claim we didn't see it. Carlos helped spread the word. Turns out, when a quiet guy speaks, people really listen. He pulled in 2 more longtime owners, Janice, who'd lived there since the building was first built, and Barry, who apparently knew where every dollar of his dues had gone since 2007. Barry had spreadsheets. Multiple. We didn't form some official group. Nothing like that. Just a loose network of concerned owners, each of us working on one thing. One person calling the original roofing contractor to ask when they'd last done work. Another digging into Koenig Property Services, LLC, and finding out it dissolved 6 months after the job was done. I started tracking changes to the HOA website, specifically which meeting minutes disappeared and when. Things started moving faster than I expected. Within a week, I got a reply to the records request, not from Sharon, from a firm, a law firm claiming to represent the HOA. That's when I knew I'd hit a nerve. Because when someone brings in lawyers over a simple request for financials, they're not trying to inform you, they're trying to scare you. The letter said my request was overbroad and unduly burdensome, and that due to privacy and operational concerns, they could not release vendor records or internal board communications. They offered a summary financial statement that looked like it had been thrown together on a napkin in a moving car. They called me Mr. Brody 5 times and used the word hostile twice. I showed it to Alex. He grinned and said, "That's not a no, that's a scared no." So we sent a second letter clarifying that under the state HOA statutes, they were legally required to provide access to vendor contracts, paid invoices, and minutes from any board vote involving budget changes over a certain threshold. It wasn't optional. It wasn't a request. It was law. While that was happening, I filed another complaint. This time with the city building department. See, something had been bugging me. If they were planning this emergency roof replacement, they'd need permits, approvals. And after the last job, 5 years ago, the one nobody wanted to talk about, I wondered if they'd even filed them this time, so I asked. The city clerk was polite, helpful, and surprisingly chatty. I asked if there were any pending permits under our building's address. He looked, found nothing, then double-checked, still nothing, and then he said something offhand that almost made me drop my phone. "You said the roof was replaced already, right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "apparently 5 years ago." "Why?" "Because we never got final inspection sign-off for that address. It's marked incomplete, no closeout, so technically that roof's not even certified." And just like that, the plot thickened. Now I had more than financial sketchiness. I had building code issues, potential safety violations, and the kicker? It wasn't even legal for them to bill us for a replacement when the last job technically wasn't even finalized. I kept all this quiet, didn't even tell Carlos. Buonanotte. Because right around then, the counterattack came. It started with a letter. Another one, this time from the HOA board itself. It said I had been placed on administrative probation due to my ongoing disruptive conduct, including spreading misinformation and attempting to incite hostility against board members. I didn't even know HOA boards could put someone on probation. That wasn't in the bylaws. It wasn't in any of the documents. They'd just made it up, pulled it out of thin air, and slapped it on paper like it meant something. Then they shut off my guest parking access code again. I got a $75 fine for improper trash bin placement, even though the bin hadn't moved in months. And then, this one's my favorite, they accused me of unauthorized use of common resources because I plugged a shop vac into an outlet in the hallway while I was cleaning up after a plumbing issue. That's when I realized this wasn't defense anymore. They were swinging back. Hard, but I was ready this time. Every letter I copied. Every fine I appealed. Every accusation I met with cold, professional responses that went directly to the management company and our lawyer. Alex said the more they acted out, the more leverage we had if this ever landed in mediation, or worse for them, in court. And while they were busy playing HOA whack-a-mole with me, I was preparing something else, something bigger, because it wasn't just me anymore. Janice found minutes from a meeting 3 years back where Sharon voted on a maintenance contract with a company her brother owned. Barry tracked down a neighbor who'd moved out 2 years ago because they were pushed by the board over another assessment, and that neighbor still had emails showing Sharon threatening to escalate legally if they didn't pay. The pieces were coming together, ugly pieces, but the more I looked at them, the clearer the picture got. This wasn't just a bad decision, this was a pattern, and if the board wanted to fight, fine, let's fight. You ever have one of those moments where everything just clicks? Not like a light switch, more like one of those big industrial breaker boxes slamming shut. Boom. Everything lights up, all the wires connect, you see it for what it is. That was the night I got the email from the local reporter. Her name was Shelby Grant. She worked for a small community paper, hyper-local stuff, mostly pet rescues and city council blurbs, but she had a section she called Behind the Gates, where she'd dig into weird HOA disputes and suburban power plays. I'd stumbled on it while doom-scrolling one night, and something about the tone of her writing stuck with me. She wasn't doing exposés for awards. She was trying to shine a light where people usually don't look. So I sent her a message, short and plain, told her I might have a story. Attached a couple PDFs, just a taste, the invoice, the duplicate roof job, a few lines about the fines, the silence, the smear tactics. Nothing dramatic. I didn't pitch it like I was blowing the lid off anything. I didn't have to. She replied the next morning. Said, "This is either a mistake or a gold mine. Either way, I want to see everything." I spent the whole weekend scanning, organizing, double-checking. I labeled everything. Cross-referenced receipts. Created a folder called Timeline of Stupid. Alex helped me write a summary statement. Clean, simple, no accusations, just facts and questions. We kept it neutral. Calm. The way you write when you know the facts speak louder than the rage in your chest. Shelby came by in person a few days later. She brought coffee and a notepad and that calm, focused energy you only see in people who've spent their lives listening before talking. She sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours, didn't interrupt once, asked sharp, specific questions, took notes like a court reporter. At one point, she said, "You know what the saddest part is? I've seen this before. Not this exact story, but this power dynamic. It's always the same. The board, the silence, the social pressure to comply." I said, "So what do we do?" She smiled. "We publish." The article went live the following week. The roof. That wasn't. Questions of transparency and accountability. Inside Briarwood Pines, HOA. It hit like a brick through a stained glass window. She laid it all out. The unexplained special assessment, the lack of bids, the connections between Sharon Keller and the now-defunct Koenig Property Services. She included snippets of the vendor receipts, the quote from the city official about the unfinished permit, screenshots of the missing meeting minutes. All of it, sourced and labeled. She didn't name me directly, but everyone in the neighborhood knew, and I was fine with that. I'd stopped hiding a long time ago. It spread fast. The paper's website didn't have a huge reach, but someone shared it on the neighborhood Facebook group. Then someone else posted it on the local Nextdoor feed. From there, it jumped into bigger HOA watchdog forums and homeowner rights groups. It wasn't viral, not in a cat video way, but it caught. People started talking, and not just behind closed doors. On sidewalks. In the gym. Outside the clubhouse, Barry said he overheard 2 board members whispering at the pool about damage control. Janice said someone from the HOA management company showed up at Sharon's unit and stayed for 2 hours. Tina, who hadn't said a word in weeks, knocked on my door and said, "I read the article. I didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry I didn't say anything before." And then the kicker. Shelby followed up with a second piece. This one was shorter, but sharper. A real gut punch. Turns out one of the maintenance contractors listed in the HOA's old budget reports was also linked to a lawsuit in another county for the same kind of shady billing Sharon had pushed through here. Only difference was, in that case, the board had caught it and reversed the charges before anyone paid. Not here. Here, people had already written checks. 3 days after that second piece ran, someone finally broke ranks. A board member. Name was Doug. Lived in Building A, mid-60s, quiet guy. Always wore those zip-up vests like he was about to go birdwatching. He sent a mass email to the HOA mailing list, addressed to fellow homeowners. He said he had concerns about the way recent projects had been approved and managed. He said he believed errors in procedure may have occurred. He said he was stepping down immediately pending independent review. That was the crack in the dam. Within 24 hours, 3 more resignations followed. Not just board members, committee leads too, landscaping, social events, finance. The whole upper crust of Sharon's little empire started peeling away like wet wallpaper. Sharon? She stayed silent, but you could feel the energy shift, like a spell had been broken. People started knocking on her door now, asking questions, demanding copies of the books. A few even talked about calling a special meeting to remove the remaining board members. The best part? I didn't have to do it. I wasn't the guy yelling in the parking lot. I wasn't the rebel anymore. I was just a neighbor with a folder. The facts did all the yelling for me. Carlos called it the great unfreezing, like people finally woke up from whatever trance they'd been under. And it wasn't just because of me. It was the pattern, the years of pressure, the subtle bullying, the way no one felt like they could speak without consequences. And now they were speaking, not yelling, not accusing, just asking questions. And for people like Sharon, that's the most dangerous sound in the world. The weirdest part, when it was all said and done, how quiet it got. Not fake, eerie quiet like the calm before a storm. Real quiet, peaceful, like the building had exhaled for the first time in years and just settled. There were still board meetings, still emails about mulch colors and whether the holiday lights needed to come down sooner, but the edge was gone. That tight, suspicious buzz under everything? It lifted. I remember sitting out on my little balcony one evening, same chair, same busted grill in the corner, same potted basil plant Sharon once claimed was a visual disruption. I had a cold drink, Ellie's old hoodie draped over the armrest, and nothing pressing on my mind for the first time in months. The roof didn't leak anymore. Not because they finally fixed it, but because the truth about it had dragged so much into the open, there was no way they could ignore it anymore. The repairs, the permit issues, the money trail, it was all out there now. And once sunlight hits something rotten, it either dries up or gets scraped out. Sharon never spoke to me again. She didn't resign, not officially. She just stopped showing up, stopped answering emails. A few weeks after Doug's email, someone said she'd taken a leave for health reasons. Maybe that's true, maybe not. Either way, she vanished. One day, she was the queen of the HOA, ruling by memo and passive aggression, and the next, she was just a name on a mailbox. The new board is different, younger, more transparent. They actually post meeting agendas now. Financials, too. It's not perfect, obviously. It's still an HOA. There's always going to be some fuss about siding paint or overgrown hedges, but now, when someone asks a question, no one gets muted. No one gets fined for speaking up. And me? I got left alone. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. Carlos and I still talk. Sometimes it's just a nod by the mailboxes. Sometimes we end up talking for an hour about absolutely nothing. I think he was relieved as someone else finally pushed back. I think a lot of people were. Nobody wants to be the first one to stand up in a room and say, "This doesn't feel right." But once someone does, it gets easier. Ellie's doing good. She doesn't really remember most of the drama, just bits and pieces. She told me once she knew something was going on when I stopped making pancakes on weekends. That got me more than I expected, so now we do pancake Sundays. Doesn't matter if I'm tired or busy or buried in work, I flip them while she doodles on the whiteboard fridge calendar, just like she used to. Small thing, sure, but it means something. This whole mess. It taught me a few things. About power, about how easily people give it up without even noticing, about how dangerous silence can be when everyone agrees not to look too hard at the truth, but also about persistence and the kind of strength it takes just to keep showing up, even when you're being drowned in fines and finger-pointing. I'm not a hero. I didn't set out to fix anything. I just wanted answers. And when I didn't get them, I started digging. The only real difference between me and the dozens of other people Sharon tried to steamroll was that this time, she left the receipts in my attic. Go figure. Funny thing is, every once in a while now, someone stops me in the parking lot or waves me down by the trash bins and says, "Hey, thanks for what you did," and I always smile and tell them, "No problem," because what else can you say? But deep down, I kind of want to tell them the truth. I didn't do it for them. I did it because I was tired of being afraid to open my mailbox. And if you've ever lived in an HOA like mine, you know exactly what I mean.